This is Kim Newlove, host of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. Thank you for joining me for episode 83. If you're new to the show, welcome. I alternate solo shows and interview shows. The solo shows are about my career change from pharmacist to voice actor, and the interview shows feature a variety of people who use their voices to advocate, educate, or entertain. Visit thepharmacistvoice.com to subscribe and read the show notes. Today's episode is an interview with Sean Pratt. We know one another because he was my nonfiction audiobook narration coach. Sean has been working as an actor for over 30 years. He has been an audiobook narrator for 25 years and has recorded over 1,000 books in almost every genre. Sean received 8 AudioFile Magazine Earphones Awards, 3 SOVAS nominations, and 5 Audie nominations from the Audio Publishers Association. Sean is also author of To Be or Wanna Be, the top 10 differences between a successful actor and a starving artist. It's an actor's how-to book that talks about approaches and behaviors that separate a thriving actor from a starving artist. Currently, Sean coaches performers on audiobook narration technique, as well as teaching classes on and writing articles about the business of the biz. To learn more about Sean Pratt, visit SeanPrattPresents.com. That's SeanPrattPresents.com. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Sean Pratt. Hi, Sean. Welcome to the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. You were my audiobook narration coach. I had such a great experience, and I'd like to share you with my audience.
Okay.
All right. Well, our conversation today could actually help some pharmacists out there. A number of pharmacists are also authors, and a number of pharmacists and then pharmacy students read those books that are written or narrated by other pharmacists. So what I want to do today is highlight how you use your voice to educate and entertain. Would it be okay to talk about how you're a coach and educator first and then get into the entertainment piece?
Sure, absolutely.
Awesome. You coach or educate 2 different types of narrators. One is authors, and the other type is professional audiobook narrators. First, can we talk about how you coach authors to narrate their own book? Have you worked with authors? What can you tell me about that?
So I started working with authors as an offshoot of my work with audiobook narrators, performers who come to me who want to get into the audiobook industry, and they come from all different, walks of life. And I'd been teaching one-on-one classes to them for quite some time. And then out of the blue, I was contacted by a colleague, Kenny Papaconstantino at Elephant Audiobooks out of Boston. And Kenny was a small company, and he was doing a lot of author reads, as we call it, where the author comes in and rents out the studio, and Kenny either directs them one-on-one or he gives them, gets them started, but they're working with an engineer. And he said, I really would like some help getting some of these authors ready for the recording event because, so many of them were operating under this misconception that, well, I wrote it, so I know how to perform it or read it, they would say. And of course, it's not reading, it is a performance. And, the 2 skills are mutually exclusive. Just because someone has written something, that's one skill. Performing it or being an interpretive artist is another. And it requires a whole different set of tools, skill set, to pull it off because, just to sort of set our world or our paradigm here, anytime that we purchase a product or service, we develop a yardstick to measure for ourselves, did that thing perform as advertised? Was it worth my time and money? So like, did my new glasses I just purchased have the correct prescription in them? Did the new computer I purchased have all the bells and whistles I paid for? And when we think about audiobooks, the metric we use ultimately from the listener's perspective is pretty straightforward, and that is, was the audiobook listening experience entertaining, that is the ultimate metric that you measure it by. Because if it's not entertaining, it won't hold their attention. And then either the information will go in one ear and out the other, or they're going to hate the book so much, they'll send it back to Audible and leave a 1-star review, which affects sales in the long run. So that performance becomes key. All right. And if it's not entertaining, then it's going to affect the sales, and it might have longer term effects on the author's career and so on. So casting the right person to narrate that book is really important. And yes, there are times when I think an author should narrate their own material, especially if they are within their own field, a bit of a celebrity or well-known or a public speaker who tours around, whether that might be a business leader, someone who deals with like a doctor, or in this case, a pharmacist. There are moments when that person pretty much should be doing it, but also there are times when that person, might not be the strongest choice for their own material. But in this case, what was happening was that Kenny contacted me and he said, I've got a bunch of authors coming up who are public speakers, or they're experts in their field and they're pretty good, but they don't realize what's about to happen to them. And as you well know, Kim, when you finally get behind the microphone, it is an entirely different experience than writing or reading a book. Yes?
Oh, yeah.
So I began to work with authors through Kenny. That was my sort of getting my feet wet out of that. And then suddenly I was getting, it seemed I was getting recommendations from a number of different other audio companies or producers who needed someone to prep the author. Now, not direct them, that's a different job. The director in an audiobook recording is basically behind the glass with the engineer, working within the performer to try to get the best performance out of them, whether it's an actor or a pharmacist, let's say. I'm trying to get them trained up to give the best possible performance. And so what I have to do is basically a crash course with just a few basic concepts to get them ready for that event. And the main thing I try to get them, one of the main things is stamina. They just don't realize how much vocal, physical, and mental stamina it takes to narrate a book. Because since, renting a studio space and a director is expensive, the idea is that you will walk in the studio at 9:00 and you have a lunch break around 1 or 2, and then you keep recording until 5. And you do that every day until the book is finished. And the amount of wear and tear that has on your voice and your brain and your body is immense if you're not used to it. This is running a marathon.
Mm-hmm.
And so then one of the main things I teach them or insist upon if they're going to work with me is that they narrate aloud every day for at least 2 hours. And a lot of them roll, they look at me sideways, and I said, I'm only asking for 2 hours. When you do this for real, you're going to be narrating probably for 6 hours a day until it's done. And this isn't like a podcast where they can change the text if they want to on the fly, or they're speaking extemporaneously. They are reading from the text. It has to be verbatim, because that if they don't, that affects WhisperSync, which is the software that Amazon uses for people who want to follow along the text while they listen to it. So it's, and the more mistakes they make, the longer it takes to do. So the very first thing my biggest aim is to get them physically and mentally tough enough to take on the task of recording.
That's a great point. There is a lot of stamina required. In fact, when I narrate, I probably only do 30 minutes at a time, because I like to narrate, then edit, narrate, then edit. It may not be what's recommended, but I agree with the stamina part. You have to have stamina.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I have a couple of things that I also help. I mean, beyond this, so the stamina is a byproduct of just sitting themselves down and reading out loud. They don't even have to have equipment. I tell them, you don't have to run out and buy, microphones and learn how to do editing. You should. My suggestion is to always hire a studio space to do it in, because if they try to layer in all the different hats that a narrator uses, the producer, the engineer, the director, and try to do a good performance and something they have never done before, the odds on it coming off well are pretty slim. It's worth the time and money to, if they are going to record their own material, to hire a studio space and a director, if they can, to work them through, to be the ears on the piece. Because frankly, they don't really know what it is they're supposed to be doing yet. They've been reading text aloud, and that's not good enough. Now they are performing. So one of the things I make them do is it's an assignment I give my students early on, and I call it the gap exercise. And this is a really good way for your listeners who are thinking about this to develop a yardstick to see how close they are between their natural speaking voice and them behind the microphone reading something. So it goes like this. The premise um, there is that they are at an event, a party, and they end up talking to a stranger who evinces interest in something that they know a lot about, and then ask them questions. So how I start the exercise with the student is I say, I want you to pick a topic that you are very knowledgeable on and you love to talk about. And I don't care what it is as long as it's a positive topic. It could be someone's love of, professional basketball, or how much they like to sail, or make cake, or garden. It really doesn't matter as long as it's something they've been doing for a long time, they love, they enjoy.
For me, it was swimming and motorcycles. But
That's right.
go
That's
on.
right. Yeah, so that's right. I forgot you were. I was really surprised when you did that. I was like, motorcycles. I would never have guessed that. It's one of the things I love about the exercise is that I never know what the topic the student's going to pick. I say, I want you to pick the exercise. And so the premise is that we're building what's known as the acting triangle. It's very simple. When we're acting, you ask yourself 3 questions. Who are you? Where are you? And who are you talking to? You answer those 3 questions. You make believe that that's real, and then you're ready to start performing. It was one of the very first concepts I was ever taught as a child in the theater. I started acting in the theater when I was 10 at school and at the local theaters in the Oklahoma City area. And it was so easy once they explained it to me that way. So they pick their topic, and so they would. The premise is like I said. Let's say they're at a party, they're in a very good mood, and they're chatting with a stranger. And let's just pick gardening for the sake of the argument. And so the idea would be in the backstory of your head. You're chatting with this person. I'm talking to this guy, and he said, "Oh yeah, the one of the interesting things about the COVID lockdown is it's given me an opportunity to enjoy some hobbies I'd given up in my 30s and 40s when I had kids, and one of them is gardening. I love gardening. It's really really great." And I say to this person, "Oh, you're not going to believe this, but I'm a gardener." And they go, "Really? That's amazing." And then they proceed to ask me 5 open-ended questions related to that topic. So questions I might write down would be things like, how did you get into gardening? What kind of gardening do you like? Have you taught your children how to garden? And so you would write those, say, 5 questions down. They're open-ended. And then you would get behind the microphone or some kind of recording software. It could be voice memo on your phone for all that it matters, right? Something simple. And then you put yourself in that mental construct of being at that party talking to this person. You project yourself into it. And then you hit record. And then you restate the first question as if you've just heard it for the first time. And then improvise your answer while trying to be as enthusiastic, entertaining, and engaging as possible, right? To be you at maximum amount of those 3 qualities: enthusiastic, engaging, and entertaining. So it might sound like this. Oh, how did I get into gardening? Oh, that's a good question. Well, okay. So you see, it needs a little backstory. Okay. See, I was born in Oklahoma City. In fact, my whole family is from Oklahoma. And my father was a fireman here in the city with the Oklahoma City Fire Department for, 22 years. And my mom was a secretary and office manager for the FAA at the airport. And well, see, there's 3 of us kids. There's my older sister Kathy and my younger brother Kurt. So I'm the the confused, quiet middle child. Anyway, so in the summer times when we were little and out of school, and I'm off and running, I'm just sort of improvising this answer, letting it just roll off my tongue. And what I tell my students is I say, answer that first question and go back and listen to it. Do you sound genuine? Is that you being enthusiastic, engaging, and entertaining for yourself? No? Then give it another shot. And when you're happy with it finally, then record your answer to the next one, and then the next one, and the next one until you get all 5 done. And it usually together all runs about 10 to 15 minutes in length altogether. And so now we have this recording. So what good is it? If we were to come up with a spectrum of 1 to 100, 100 meaning this author at their most enthusiastic, engaging, and entertaining, and 1 meaning the author, passed out after one too many, I suppose. If they do the exercise correctly, they're going to be in the upper 90s on that spectrum. And then what I say is, now try to narrate a bit of your book and then listen to it and try to put it on that same spectrum. And they're going to realize that that recording of their reading from their book falls somewhere in the middle of 1 to 100. And so therefore there is a gap between the two recordings, the one of them speaking extemporaneously and the one of them reading from their own text. And that gap is the gap in performance. And so what I'm trying to get them to do by practicing every day is to slowly but surely close the gap between the way they sound in real life and the way they sound behind the microphone. But it takes a while. I think I told you, Kim, that there's a Miles Davis, the jazz trumpeter, once said that it takes a long time to learn how to sound like yourself.
Mm.
And you experienced that too when you were my student, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely. I sounded like I was reading a little bit there at the beginning, and it
Mm-hmm.
definitely improved throughout. But it's not just sounding conversational, there's other voices that a narrator needs to be able to use. Is there any way you could talk about those too? Because it's not always sounding conversational, sometimes you're doing other things.
Yeah. So the majority of the time, though, 90% of the time, we're in sort of this conversational voice, as it were. We're just talking.
Right.
It should sound like we're just talking. But there's 3 other voices, as I call them, that are important. The second most important voice that we're in is what I call the teaching voice. And what we're doing with that voice is that when we come to the main idea in each paragraph, the idea the author wants to explore inside the paragraph, we want to teach it to the listener. Well, how do we do that with our voice? Well, mainly we are deliberately altering the rhythm of our voice so the person listening can take in the new information piece by piece. Tab A goes into slot B to make object C. And so I tell my students how much you alter the rhythm of the sentence is in direct connection to the complexity of the idea you're trying to get across. So the more complex the idea, the new idea you want to share in your book, the slower it has to be. We naturally break up a sentence into its little units of information, and that's what we're doing there. If anyone's ever taught a class or had children or taught their parents how to use a computer, you have to take it a little piece at a time. And that is the teaching voice itself. But it has to do with figuring out when you are in that voice. So one of the exercises I make my authors do is go find their idea in every paragraph and follow the path as it traces itself through the text of that paragraph. Because inside a piece of nonfiction, in every paragraph, the author's doing one of 2 things. They're either taking their idea and they're explaining it to us in the teaching voice, or they're deciding to stop and comment on it in their conversational voice. It's pretty much one of the 2. So it's about understanding, when am I actually teaching my idea and when am I commenting on it. There's another voice that we use when we quote other people or other things. If you're quoting movie dialogue or a colleague or from a book. And this term is called the voice of the other. And what we're really doing for all practical purposes is putting air quotes around what we say. So if I were to go, that's when Dr. Fauci said, today we have launched our new COVID initiative and joined the World Health Organization again. Well, I've just lifted it slightly. I've put air quotes around it. So that helps me, the listener, distinguish when the author is telling me something that they wrote and was quoting somebody else or something else. And then the final voice that I try for in my performance, that I try to teach them, is what I call the documentary voice. And I use it for little bits around the text, like the beginnings of chapter headings, subchapter headings, enumerations. Um, you know, it's a quiet, flat kind of voice. It's the voice of the man who does How It's Made on television. If you haven't seen that show, you can find it on YouTube. But he's got a very calm, quiet voice, and this is the documentary voice. So, chapter 1, we're going to explore this. Subchapter heading, this. Number 1, number 2, and so on. And so there are 4 different kinds of voices. And the idea here is that if each one is sharp enough, over time the listener intuitively picks up on, oh, the author's talking to me now. Oh, they're teaching to me now. Oh, they're quoting somebody else now. Oh, that's a subchapter heading. And so it becomes clearer for the listener because part of the entertainment value of listening to nonfiction is clarity. The moment a listener goes, "What? Well, I don't understand what are they saying?" We've lost them, and that's not very entertaining. So I teach them that idea. I make them do the gap exercise, and when they turn it in and I listen to it, I say, "Okay, we've just made our benchmark. That's what you have to sound like when you narrate your piece. So when you're practicing, and if you're recording yourself, go back and listen. How close do you sound like yourself compared to how you sound when you're reading?" And there's an obvious gap there. And the only way we can close that gap enough is by having them practice at least 2 hours a day. Sometimes over the same chapter again and again and again until it begins to feel natural.
How is preparing to be a professional audiobook narrator different from an author preparing to narrate their own book? Do you have different curriculum? Because I know I went through the 14-session professional audiobook narrator course that you provide.
Right. So if you're going to be doing this for a living, you have to have a much broader and deeper understanding first of all, of how to analyze text. I tell my students all the time that learning to narrate nonfiction is all about seeing the internal structure in the writing. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. And so this allows me to make it. Once you learn to see the structure, it takes care of 80% of my acting choices for me. I know which voice I'm in. I know what they're trying to get across in this anecdote or whatever. But also, we have to learn how to deal with different kinds of genres. You know, different genres demand slightly different technique based on what it is. So if you're narrating a how-to book or a cookbook or something, that's a how-to book. There are certain ways to do that, to interact with the listener, and that's different from doing a first-person memoir. That's also different from doing, say, religious material with lots of citations, or how to do a piece that has foreign languages in it or mathematical equations. So my curriculum is to teach my students the broadest, to give them the broadest and deepest exposure to how to deal with those various genres as a narrator. For the author, I usually only meet them, say, 2 to 3 times a week apart for each one. And my goal is to just teach them just a few basic ideas. I don't want to overload them because they're going to be nervous enough. So I teach them some things beyond the gap exercise of how to score text. And if your listeners are musicians or no musicians, as a musician, you score your text, your music. This is piano forte here. We want to retard the tempo here. And you make those marks in the music. We do the same thing with our text. We're telling ourselves when to breathe, when to emphasize a word, when to take our melody of our voice up or down, depending on what we want to emphasize. And there's a way to do that. And it's a very simple system I teach them. But I make them quite literally score their entire book. Because I'm showing them that yes, even though they wrote it, they didn't quite understand the structure they applied to write the book. Because we learn how to write essays and in books, and those concepts go back to when we were in grade school, and we learned things like the 5-sentence paragraph or the 5-paragraph essay. Those are things that have been instilled in them for so long. They're natural. But what I'm trying to do is reintroduce those ideas so they can see the structure in their own writing and then use it to their advantage. I also teach them a sort of a basic acting concept I call paragraph colors, as you recall, Kim. Do you remember that lesson?
Absolutely, the emotions associated with what you're narrating.
Right. Is that if you look carefully enough, an author will always tell you how they feel about the topic they're discussing, paragraph by paragraph. They will use language that then gives us the overall color, as I refer to it, the emotion for that paragraph. It doesn't mean that every sentence in the paragraph is a reflection of being happy or angry or, you know, reflective or whatever. But enough of them are that that becomes the tone. And the reason we do that is the sound of a person being angry has to sound different from them being happy or anxious or being in their sort of professor mode or something like that. The voice changes its melody, its rhythm, its tempo, its diction, its breathing. Those things all change depending on the emotion we're feeling. And so, what I'm trying to introduce to them is that if they look carefully enough at their own writing, it will tell them how they feel about the topic. And then if they understand that and make a choice, so I'm being sarcastic here, or I'm being angry here, and then in this paragraph I'm being, you know, melancholy or whatever. I then can use that as a performance, and it just changes up the read just enough to keep the listener interested. One of my catchphrases that I have for my students is that your narration should be consistently inconsistent, that it's always changing, just like natural speech. And the only way, but it has to change organically. There has to be a reason for it to change. And that's what these basic tools show them. So I go through and I walk them through the concept, and then I turn them loose on their own material again. And then we come back and we read live. And depending on, some of my authors do have some basic recording equipment, I make them read and give me, say, 15 minutes of a chapter. And I listen to that before we meet. And then we can go from there. And I know by listening to them where I need to push them or affirm something they're doing or whatever. So it's a much more truncated program of, let's say, like I said, two to four. So it just depends. My goal is to get them to peak right before or right as they're going into the studio to record it. Just like a marathon runner, you know, they train up so that by the time they get to the starting line for the New York Marathon, they're at their mental and physical peak and ready to go, as opposed to not quite there or having passed their peak. And so I try to time out the sessions and the workload, so by the time they know they're going to record it, they're ready. And that also speaks to, like I said, to me, it's a much smarter. It's more expensive, but it's a smarter move for the overall finished product to go into a studio and have someone record you, as opposed to, oh well, I'll record this book on weekends in my basement. Well, first of all, if you don't have a professional setup and know how to use it really well, the quality of the audio will probably be mediocre to terrible. And also, it can easily become this albatross around your neck once you really get into it and realize just how much work is involved in wearing all those hats and coming up with a performance that's entertaining.
You had mentioned earlier about reasons that it's important to hire a trained and experienced audiobook narrator instead of doing it yourself. I know you mentioned a couple right there. You don't have to run your own equipment. If the performance is not quite as good as what you intended it to be, then you're stuck with it, you know? And then
Yes.
also something that people may not realize is that you have to you have to pass specs for ACX. They don't just take anything. It has to be super quiet and there can't be any cats meowing or dogs barking or jets going
Yes.
overhead. I mean, they're very, very strict. Anything
Well,
that
they
you
should
buy on
be.
Audible, it's past these specs.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be. Because, you're asking someone to spend their money and time listening to your story. I mean, there's a reason why when you work on a movie, you may end up having to do one scene 15 times because the previous 14 times there was some little mistake that the director knew wasn't going to fly. A plane flew over, someone flubbed a line, someone knocked over a glass or whatever. Those are obvious ones. So in the audiobook, if you have your cat meowing, or there's a truck that keeps rolling by, or the quality of the microphone is terrible, or the noise floor is too loud, it's not, what it happens is it becomes distracting. And so, like it or not, let's say you recorded it like that and you're just going to release it through your own website. Well, like it or not, the quality of the recording, it cycles back into the listener's mind to reflect on the quality of your idea. I tell my students all the time that our goal is to sound my character is the character of the pharmacist I'm narrating, right? So the clunkier my narration, when I'm wrapping my mouth around, long, difficult language, medical language, if I sound clunky and slow, it makes the author sound stupid or less intelligent than they are. Now, the listener could parse that out and say, well, that's the narrator not doing a great job. But on another level, on a subconscious level, it actually will affect the overall quality of the performance and how the listener perceives it. And so if they're turned off by that, they're not going to retain that information. I mean, it's that old chestnut that says, when you're laughing, you're learning, meaning that when we're in a positive environment, having fun, learning something new, the brain secretes chemicals that help us create longer lasting, more vivid memories of the event. And so if the listener's not having a good time because they're distracted by the quality of the audio itself, not to mention the performance, the amount they retain is much less. And in the end, they might say, well, that wasn't a very good book. And the performance colors the actual quality of the information being shared.
I think I have seen a lot of reviews on Amazon where they're commenting more about what has been said in the book, the text. Even though they're
Mm-hmm.
consuming it as an audiobook, that's when you know you have a good narrator because they're talking about what happened in the book. They're not complaining about the performance. So, yeah, you've brought up a lot of really good points.
That's my job.
But
so I'm trying to. Oh, go ahead.
Go sorry. Ahead. But at the same time, there are a lot of pharmacist authors out there who I personally wish had their books in audiobook format because that's just how I consume my books these days. I'm a busy gal, and if I'm going to walk or do dishes or fold laundry, that's what I'm going to be listening to is an audiobook. And I just feel like they might be missing out on a broader audience. And I'm not trying to shame anybody or point a finger, but I wonder if you could speak to that. Are there any authors that you've ever helped make the transition from author to author with an audiobook, whether they're doing it themselves or hiring somebody, and they've reached a broader audience and been happy about it?
Oh, yeah. No, they've all been happier about it. I think I just, in this day and age, the notion that you would write a book and not try to have an audio. I mean, you have it in print form and you have it on Kindle. The next thing is you have to have it on audio for people just like you, Kim. Right? You're the author, whether they're a pharmacist or a business person, they're missing out on a segment of the market that wants to hear their story. You see, and that can have. And here's the thing: that can have broader implications with their future as a writer, or the books they would publish afterwards, or even just the opportunities that arise from it. I've had authors come to me with their story, and we do. I coach them. They go record it, and it gets out, and then I touch base with them. 6 months, a year, 2 years later, how's it going? And they almost to a person, they say, well, the audiobook came out, it was very well received, and this has led to getting me more speaking engagements, or it opened up an opportunity to do XYZ that I never would have had happen had not a particular person listened to the audiobook while they were flying from New York to LA, and that person is the producer of this, or the lead of a department at some academy or something. You never know where the recording is going to end up, who's going to listen to it. And that's actually a wonderful thing. So to me, it's just being smart with your career goals in this case, as a pharmacist, broadly speaking. So, maybe someone writes a book and they do the first one might be self-published and they put out the audiobook. But then they come around, they have another thing they want to talk about. Well, because of the strength of those sales, because trust me, now let's say they want to get a publisher to pick up the tab. Trust me when I tell you, publishers look at the algorithms and the sales for all of those things. So if you want to keep producing new material for in the world you live in this case, the pharmacy, trust me that, if you want a publisher to help promote the next one, they're going to look at all those sales and how and the reach of that. So to me, it just makes smart business sense in this day and age to have an audiobook version of whatever project you have, whether you narrate it or somebody else narrates it.
All good points. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about how you are an entertainer. You you are a very successful audiobook narrator, and I think you're a very effective coach because you've been there. You've been kind of the student, meaning you started off from nothing and then all of a sudden, 23 years go by in a flash, right? And you've got
Right.
1,000 audiobooks or more under your belt. That's just amazing. What's Seriously, that's amazing. And I think that helps you be an effective coach because you've been there. You've started from nothing, from having 0 books, and over time
Mm-hmm.
you've learned things and you can impart that wisdom to us, the business advice, the performance advice. But then again, as an entertainer, for example, you just won the Earphones award just last year in 2020 in the category of history and biography for narrating Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. Congratulations, that's amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a wonderful book. Yeah, for your listeners, it's an examination of this one family in Colorado that had, I want to say, 10 children. 6 of them, the boys, presented with full-blown schizophrenia as adults. And it's a story about that family, but also Bob Kolker paralleled with that the history of our understanding of this medical condition of schizophrenia, going back to when they thought it was demons possessing people, and then through Freud and into modern medical. It was just a wonderful book, and I'm really pleased that Oprah picked it up for her book club, and then the Earphone Awards. And I know it's being put forward for a nomination for an Audie. We'll see if it actually gets selected. An Audie, for your listeners, are sort of our version of the Oscars for audiobooks. So I think it's my understanding the book was put forward for a nomination. We'll see if it gets nominated.
Well, good luck.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I'm sorry, now I've forgotten what the question was.
Well, that's all right. I just wanted to talk about how successful you've been because you went from 0 to
Yeah.
1,000. And hey, and by the way, when you get to be on Oprah's book club list like that, do you get to meet Oprah?
Yeah, don't I wish?
I had to ask.
If we win, Bob and I can be on her podcast or her video cast or something. We'll see. And then yeah, that would be a serious feather in my cap.
That would
Yeah,
be a
so
much deserved opportunity, I tell you. You
that'd
worked
be
hard
great.
on
It'd be a
that.
lot of fun. So yeah, so the audiobook thing for me was just an outgrowth of me being a performer. I started acting, like I said, when I was 10 years old here in Oklahoma City at school and at the theaters. And I did that all through high school. And by the time I graduated, I knew I wanted to be an actor. That was really the only thing I wanted, really. And so I went to the College of Santa Fe in New Mexico to get my BFA in acting. And when I graduated 20, um, my burning desire was to be a classical theater actor. So I really wasn't interested very much in going to Los Angeles to work in television and film. I wanted to go to New York and do theater. Um, so I journeyed over there, and for the next 15 years, I worked with an off-Broadway classical repertory theater. I did repertory theater around the country. I did summer stock, and not just Shakespeare, but Shaw and Sophocles and Marivaux, and lots of classics. And I really loved it because sometimes people ask me, "Well, do you have a master's degree?" And I don't, but I jokingly tell them I got my master's degree doing 8 shows a week at the Pearl Theater off Broadway, while rehearsing the next show of the season, and doing that for almost 5 solid years. The education I learned about text analysis, language, voice and diction, breathing, physical comedy, things like that. I could never have learned in a master's program anywhere else. I learned on the job. And one of the main things that I learned at the Pearl was we approached spoken language like music. That's how we equated it. And so we learned about melody and rhythm and tempo in how to speak it so the audience heard the architecture of the sentence in the air. That's what we used to say all the time. By modulating your voice and knowing how to say a sentence correctly, they see or hear rather that architecture. And so fast forward to say around 1996, I moved to Washington, D.C. to sort of start my life over again. And I'd worked in that city before, and I had met an actor there who we were working on a show together. And I'd asked him what he did when he wasn't working, and he said he narrated audiobooks. And I was like, what's that all about? I had no idea that was the thing. And he explained it to me, and I was really interested, or is interesting, I should say. I wasn't necessarily interested because I was working full time as a theater actor. But when I got down to Washington in 1996, the plays that I had been cast in fell through, and now I was really at loose ends about what to do with myself. But I remember that conversation, and so he helped introduce me to some audiobook producers and casting people in Washington, and then one thing led to another, and suddenly I had my very first book from a major publisher, from Blackstone Audio, and I was off and running. And very soon I was doing about a book a week, about 50 books a year. I just loved it. It had all the challenge of working with text and performing, but I got to do it at home in my pajamas. You know, and I was married by that time, and we were starting a family. So this way, I could help get the kids on the school bus. I could work, do my own thing, and then when they came home, still record when I wanted to. And I was doing a lot of fiction initially. I think most narrators come to it with a performance background. They want to do fiction first. But I needed to have more work to make it full time, and I kept asking for nonfiction work. And so, because I was sort of the new guy, they gave me a lot of sort of B-list material, really dense, difficult pieces that were 10, 20, 30 hours long. And I really cut my teeth as a narrator doing everything from, I did a 5-volume history of the state of California. That was 150 hours long. It was 5 volumes, each of 30 hours long. I did books on astrophysics and archaeology and, world history. And they were fascinating. But initially, the narration portion was just going to be one more thing I did. By that time in my life, I was also finally doing film and television and some modeling, and I was a spokesperson for corporations at convention work and things. And sort of, that's the life of a performer. You do a little bit of everything to make a living. But over the years, I just kept booking more and more and more work, and I really enjoyed the narration, so I've let the other stuff sort of go to the wayside. And then I'm going to say, I began to teach classes here and there, little workshops on audiobook narration, but I got serious about coaching about 6 years ago. And I just wanted another career challenge, frankly. And I wanted to share my knowledge. And, as they say, if you teach the thing you do every day, how can you possibly go wrong? I'm not making it up. This is what I do every single day, and I still narrate. I'm doing a book about the evolution of the human brain right now, and it's a wonderful piece. And so the entertainment portion for me, it's a little different. I want to be entertaining, meaning to sound like myself through the author's words, but I think there's a higher calling in nonfiction. And I was just discussing this with a colleague the other day. I regularly get emails from listeners because they can find me on the web. And of course, I have my email address on my website. And the emails sort of run along these lines thematically. They'll say, I listened to your book, that you narrated called The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Van der Kolk or some other book. I listened to the book and your performance was really amazing. I really was able to understand the ideas he was sharing. And I've been able, through his book and your performance, to really tackle this issue in my life, whether that's a medical issue or a business issue or whatever. And so I think that when I think about entertaining, I think there's a bit of a higher calling in nonfiction, because from the emails I've gotten from people over the years, I know I've had a small part and helping make their lives better. And I really wasn't thinking about that when I got into nonfiction narration. It just sort of came to me with the feedback I was getting. But, if I could do a book on, say, COVID, let's say, explaining how the virus is transmitted and how the vaccine works and all that, and that book goes out as an audiobook and people listen to it, and maybe they feel more comfortable now taking the vaccine, and it might end up saving their life. Now, granted, I don't take the lion's share, but I'm just saying that I had a little piece of that. I helped in my little way, and I think that's a noble thing to shoot for in nonfiction. So that's entertaining to me.
What you're talking about is the convergence of education and entertainment. Edutainment, I think, is what people call it.
Yes, yes.
No, that's important. You don't have to be
It is.
you don't have to be a clown to be edutaining. You just have to
Right.
be able to be engaging, entertaining, and enthusiastic, like you were talking about earlier. Because
Right.
there's people out there that have a really hard time learning because they don't like to sit and read a book, or they don't feel like they have time. But when they finally get around to picking out a title that they want to listen to, and you are the person that is delivering it to them in the way that they need to hear it, it's a little bit magical, like you just said. And I think that's awesome that people are sharing the connection that you made between the text and what was going on in their life. And maybe they made some sort of a change in their life, a change for the better. That's really cool to be part of that. Way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's something that you should think about too in your narration work. It's one of the it's always funny having done this for so long. This is my 26th year now.
Oh, is it? Your
Um,
website said 23. I'm sorry if I misspoke.
I have to update it. No, I started in 96, so let's do the math on that. 25, 26 years, somewhere in there.
25. I graduated high school in
Yes.
96, my friend.
Shush. um, but the thing to remember is that it's what I always find interesting is that even as long as I've been doing this, I always end up finding something new every year, some new thing I can teach my students, or some revelation about the job of being a narrator. That was one of them. It would sort of that really came home in the last few years, that this was so much bigger than me, that I had a small part in helping. Like another, different one. I did a book by Tom Nichols, who's a conservative, small C conservative writer who teaches at the American War College, and he talks about politics and international issues. He wrote a book called "The Death of Expertise." How in our day and age of the internet, people go, well, I know you have a PhD in pharmacy, but I did a Google search, so my opinion is just as valid as yours. And he was talking about the dilemma of that, how experts are being ignored, right? And we see this happen with crazy things, whether it's QAnon or anti-vaxxers or whatever. And so I got the book. I did it, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and it's exploded. The recording has been one of the biggest sellers I had, next to "The Body Keeps the Score" by Mr. Kolker. And once again, I get emails from him or people who listen to it, and he also emails me saying, people keep coming back and saying the performance was so good, they really understood what he was trying to say. And if that helps them navigate this weird time that we live in, then great. I've done something even more than just my job, which is to entertain them. I've left them with something. I've helped in a broader way. And that's a humbling feeling, but it's also inspiring. It keeps me coming back again and again to get in the booth. Some days when I don't necessarily want to get in there to work, but
it's a reward.
I have to remember
It's a reward.
it is a reward. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Keeps you
Yeah.
going. Well, congratulations on all of your success. And there's one last thing that I'd like to talk about before we wrap this up. You mentioned that you made a change from stage actor to audiobook narrator, and other things that you did as well. What I want to talk about is how pharmacists right now, there are a number of pharmacists out there who are looking to do something else, whether it's on the side or as their primary occupation. I want you to talk a little bit about when you made the change, What helped you most to make that change?
Well, there was a couple of things. Like I said, being a performer, the idea of focusing exclusively on audiobooks was because that's the next hill to climb. It's like I felt like I had done theater for so many years, and I had done television and film, and I knew what those were. I felt like it hit the summit of that, and so to me, it was the next challenge, the next life challenge I wanted. And then going beyond that, now the next life challenge was to become a coach. So I'm always trying to up the ante. I'm always trying to evolve into something, but I don't necessarily plan it. It comes to you. You know, you see an opportunity, and you see an opportunity that you think will be satisfying and answer a lot of needs that you might have. Of course, another one was financial, although I would say that a pharmacist makes a lot more money day in, day out than a narrator. So, they're just to forewarn anybody out there who wants to make a change, like going into my profession, it can become so easy with our careers, no matter what they are. We make money, and then that buys a certain lifestyle. And then that lifestyle itself becomes a trap. I was watching a podcast. Joe Rogan had Elon Musk on, and he was talking about how Elon Musk was selling all of his properties. And he was selling, he's going to have, he had like 7 houses, and now he's just going to have one. And he had like 20 cars, he's just going to have 2 or something. And he said, the minute you start buying objects, they end up owning you. And it's very easy to have a lifestyle, especially in our culture and in the West, where we spend every dime we have living a certain lifestyle because we think that's what we're supposed to have. And in the end, we get handcuffed to that. And then if our job doesn't turn out to be as fulfilling as we thought it would be, or maybe over time it just becomes routine, well, now you're stuck. And that's a horrible place to be in. You feel calcified emotionally, psychically. And so if a person, let's say, has been a pharmacist and they want a new challenge, whether something else part-time or to leave pharmacy altogether and maybe become a full-time writer or to do who knows what, or a narrator, the challenge will be to scale down their life to open up the space, both in time and money, to pursue the idea. Because if you're trying to work full-time initially, it's going to be extremely difficult to make the transition, or at least to have a good experience doing it. I know that's how everybody starts, of course, but eventually, whatever that is that once you see an opportunity, and you have to make space for it in your life if you really are serious about it. And of course, it's scary, but that's scary. It's better, like they say, the devil you know as opposed to the devil you don't know. Yeah, you may be bored in your job or frustrated, but at least it's a 9 to 5 and it pays for the lifestyle you have. Now you're asking yourself, or maybe even your family, to start with something else that might curtail those things. But like my dad always said, life is way too short to be unhappy. And if you really want something, then get serious about finding what does it actually mean to do X, to become a potter or a carpenter or an audiobook narrator or a writer full time. The amount of effort, what should you realistically expect? And will you, and not just with money or time, it's also what do you get out of it? What is the fulfillment? I've had plenty of people who come to me from all walks of life, CPAs, doctors, lawyers, business people, teachers, you name it. And they say, I did this for this many years and I'm done. I need something else. And narrating audiobooks seems to be the right choice. I really love it. I think I have the patience and the talent and the determination to stick with it. I just need the training. And then that's what I'm there for. And I say, okay, it's not going to be easy. I tell them, take the notion of making any money doing this off the table for at least a year. You're not making real money. This is show business ultimately, and there is no guarantee. And that scares some people to death, and rightly so. If you've got a family to support. I mean, I remember when you came to me, you have a family, you're a pharmacist, you wanted to branch off into these other things, and that was not an easy transition, was it?
No, I could talk a little bit about that if you want, but I love it.
Yeah, please, please.
Well, when I first came to you, it was on the recommendation from Jeffrey Kafer. And I had been working with Nancy Wolfson before that. I didn't even know what the voiceover industry was. I had in mind that I wanted to narrate pharmacy continuing education journals, which there wasn't even really a market for. And everybody kept saying, you need to talk to somebody that does something like that because it doesn't exist. Jeffrey Kafer listened to me. He said, oh, you got to go to Sean Pratt. He's going to train you so that even if it doesn't exist, you'll be ready for when it does, or you can help create
Mm.
it. And what your original question was, you came to me and you wanted to do something else. And yeah, I did. But the thing is, it's that challenge that you talked about. I have a thing in mind that I want to do. I would like to provide a service that pharmacists appreciate using my voice. I'm using my identity as a pharmacist and my voice, literally, to help them. So I'm really making it happen, but it's not always what you think it's going to be. I mean, I thought I was going to do one thing and I ended up having to pivot because the thing I wanted to do didn't exist. And you helped me. And thank you. And now I'm equipped to do so much: audiobooks, e-learning. This has helped me with my long form narration for medical. There's so much. I hope I answered your question.
Right. Yeah. No, you did. And that's the other thing too, is that as they say, the only permanent thing in life is change. And the irony is that people who are so desperate for security, they hunker down into this. I want to hold on to the thing that I think was my past or what I have. When of course it's going to evolve anyway. And the people who are best able to manage change are those always looking ahead to the next opportunity. I, for instance, with my coaching, I wanted to do it because it was a challenge, but I also knew the industry was growing by leaps and bounds, but I didn't want to be narrating a book a week. It was exhausting. I had to do it because we were raising a family and we were dealing with finances of that and moving and, insurance and life. But I didn't always want to do that. That wasn't working for me anymore. And then this opportunity came along. People kept asking me, well, do you do any private coaching? And I just kept saying, no, I'm too busy narrating. That was my full-time job. And then I decided one year, about 6 years ago, well, I'll make a little space, just a little space in my life to see what happens here. And so I began to coach what we call being a tactical coach, where people would read for me and I would give them immediate feedback. And I found I enjoyed it. And then I got a taste for it. And I thought, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to develop my own curriculum, be a strategic coach, like a college class. And I wanted to teach nonfiction because nobody was else teaching it. And I wanted to teach a business track about how to do it for a living because no one was putting those two things together. And suddenly I had a real challenge, but I also saw there was a real need in the industry. I had an opportunity to create something really unique that could help a lot of people. And I could pivot into that direction, like you said. And suddenly my life exploded with opportunity. I never would have thought, had you asked me 6 years ago, that I would have 100 students on my active roster. And, I see 23 people a week or more, plus narrate. But to be in a place where I'm so much happier with my life, I never would have thought that was a possibility. But it's because I put my toe down that path that the path itself began to expand and to branch off within itself. And then, oh, this looks like a stronger, let me try that. And in the end, the yardstick I have for myself is, am I feeling satisfied with my work? And I am, definitely. I love teaching. And I still love narrating. I actually love it more because I'm not doing as much of it anymore. I don't do 50 books a year. I do 25. I do half as many.
That's still quite a bit. And something that you may, yeah, something that you may not realize that you've also done is you created a family. Whenever you post on social media, your students like, comment on, and share your stuff. You have brought together people. When you put out there that you have a new graduate from your program, can you tell how many people that you have coached congratulate them? We're family. I'm telling you,
Yeah.
you're like
Yeah.
you're our coach, but I mean, we're family and we reach out to each other. You equip us with accountability buddies, which has been amazing. You're a pretty good judge of character. You match us up pretty good. So I'm telling you, it's like a family, and whether you realize you're doing it or not, You're doing a great job, and I have really appreciated being your student. Thank you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I didn't, once again, that's also been a side thing that I never would have considered when I started. You know, once I began to go down this road of building a curriculum, it just keeps evolving. And every year it changes slightly. I add this, I change that, I take away this thing that doesn't work, and so on. And I put because I'm trying, and now I realize what I've become this thing. I've become sort of a guru, or the Ginger Yoda, as my students refer to me.
Yes.
And 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 I realized that there is a bit of an obligation there. I had a friend of mine, she's a teacher, and she said, "You've become a bit of a guru, and you have an obligation to care for your students," which I never really thought about when I started. I just thought I was just going to pass on knowledge, and it's become this other thing I could never have foreseen. It's become so much more wonderful.
Well, congratulations on all your success in coaching and audiobooks.
Thank you.
And before we wrap this up, is there anything else you'd like to share?
Um, well, several things, I suppose. One is for those of you listening to the podcast thinking about performing your piece. My advice is stamina. Read it out loud. Get some coaching, whether it's with, say, me or somebody else, whatever. I would advise you to work with a technician and a director in a studio to get the audiobook of the highest quality possible. And remember how it can affect your career in the long run. And if nothing else, this could be your gateway into something much bigger than you ever thought possible. Whether or not whether you stay in the world of pharmacy or evolve out of it into another direction you could never have foreseen. And it might just be the fact of exploring being a writer or narrator was the key to unlocking that possibility. For those of you who are looking to find out more about what I do, you can find me online at seanprattpresents.com. Or you can look me up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn for any other kinds of information or what I talk about and what I teach.
Sounds great. Thank you again so much for being my guest on the Pharmacist Voice podcast. This has been amazing.
Thank you very much for having me, Kim. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining me for episode 83 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to subscribe and read the show notes.